Welcome to ABC Art's monthly book column. Each month, we'll present a shortlist of new releases read and recommended by the bookshelf's Kate Evans and the book show's Claire Nichols and Sarah Lestrange, alongside freelance writers and book reviewers. This month, we're thrilled to present recommendations from Declan Fry. All four read voraciously and widely, and the only guidelines we gave them were, make it a new release, make it something you think is great. The resulting list, drawn from January to March releases, features a fictionalized family history of actor-turned-assassin John Wilkes Booth, Italian autofiction about a child of deaf adults, a New York wedding planner, and her congressman brother grappling with their Puerto Rican heritage, and two dystopian novels, one exploring the refugee experience, and the other featuring a wistful talking pig. It also includes three exciting debut novels from Australian writers. The first a funny and emotionally rich story of a woman at the end of her life, by a writer of Calcadoon heritage, one set in an Australia where the landscape is constantly rearranging, and another featuring a protagonist obsessed with Harry Houdini's 1910 attempt to fly across Australia. Booth by Karen Joy Fowler. Serpent's Tail. Fowler was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2014 for We Are All Completely Beside Ourselves. Before reading this book, I knew a few scant facts about John Wilkes Booth, actor-turned-assassin, pro-slavery, Abraham Lincoln at the theater. I didn't know that Booth was part of an incredibly famous family, that his dad was at one time the most popular Shakespearean actor in America, and that his siblings also went on to be famous actors and writers. I also didn't know that the family that produced one of America's most prominent white supremacists was also incredibly progressive. Led by their actor dad, the family was anti-slavery, atheist and even remarkably, for this period of history, vegetarian. So where did John Wilkes Booth go wrong? Rather than focus on the assassin, novelist Karen Joy Fowler turns her attention to some of those other Booths, in particular, three of his five siblings, Rosalie, Edwin and Aisha. Rosalie is shy and withdrawn, and written off as an invalid by her family. Edwin is the overlooked middle son, who goes on to be as famous an actor as his dad. And Aisha is the firebrand, a smart and ferocious woman, whose biggest weakness might just be her unconditional love for her family. We follow the siblings over several decades as they quote Shakespeare at each other, see the family's fortunes rise and fall, and witness the radicalization of their beloved brother John. The characters are flawed and compelling, and as readers we have to consider how complicit they might be in what is to come. Narrated in the present tense, the book has an urgency that propels the reader through its 480 pages. It's an engrossing account of a tumultuous moment in America's history, rendered with incredible s. I was transfixed. CN. Scattered All Over the Earth by Yoko Tawada. New Directions. Tawada won the National Book Award for Translated Literature in 2018 for The Emissary. Reading Yoko Tawada is a marvel. Born in Tokyo and currently living in Berlin, Tawada writes in both Japanese and German. She has even gone so far as to compose novels in both languages at once. See her brilliant Das nackte Auge, translated into English by Susan Bernofsky as The Naked Eye. As in her previous work, Scattered All Over the Earth is a reflection on language, migration, and identity that manages to be entirely unpredictable. Canute, a graduate student studying linguistics in Copenhagen, encounters a woman named Haruko one day on TV and determines to meet her. Haruko is a refugee from an archipelago somewhere between China and Polynesia that has sunk and disappeared. Cleverly, the novel first introduces Haruko as speaking a gnomic, self-made language that can be understood throughout Scandinavia, which she privately calls Panska. Panska reads like pidgin, until we switch to Haruko's point of view, where she speaks and thinks with total fluency, cleverly revealing the losses that occur when foreigners stay foreign. As the pair travel across Europe, they encounter other characters with their own stories. A trans woman from India, a German woman, an indigenous man from Greenland, and another refugee from Japan, all trying to make sense of the new linguistic and political landscape of Europe. There are a number of jokes and puns in Japanese and other languages that speakers of those languages will enjoy, and others will simply have to wonder at or intuit. The fact that there is sometimes no attempt to explicate or gloss these is part of the book's lesson. In a Japanese interview, Tawada mentioned drawing inspiration from such Danish luminaries as Hamlet, the man who does nothing until he has to. Hans Christian Andersen, a fantasist, also feels relevant to this vibrant and typically freewheeling work. DF. How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. Bloomsbury. Nagamatsu has a robot dog called Calvino. He told the Brooklyn Rail, he and Calvino feels like more than just a bunch of servos and a motherboard. In American writer Sequoia Nagamatsu's novel you'll meet a wistful talking pig, who wants to know the end of The Lord of the Rings. A Buddhist monk, who presides over services for robot dogs who've barked their last bark. A couple who can only speak to each other properly in a virtual reality game. And a young theme park attendant dressed as a giant mouse whose job is to give dying children their very best final day, before sending them off forever on a euthanasia roller coaster. And truly, that's only the half of it. There are also funerary hotels, dark caverns full of floating memory bubbles, spaceships, and a host of tender, almost love stories. All these apparently disparate tales are connected, with a character here and a sleight of hand there. A tiny moment in one story that becomes a shadow in the next. This is all easier to follow than it sounds. It begins in the Arctic Circle, with a group of scientists accidentally setting a plague loose on the world. I know what you're thinking. Here we go, another dystopia, another stand-in for COVID, another set of cod science theories. But stay with me, plague stories are shifting, and this one is worth entering. It's ambitious, hopeful, creative. As the story bounds ahead, chapter by chapter, from something like the present to a far distant, starry future, we see a world that is changed by mass death and by grief, by the way societies must adapt and even create new economies of loss. The world Nagamatsu imagines doesn't tear itself apart like a zombie apocalypse, but rather finds ways to survive. That's quite an imagination. K.E. The Very Last List of Vivian Walker by Megan Albany. Hachette. Albany is also a singer and songwriter, and wrote an album to accompany her novel. I'm always dubious when a book blurb promises laughter and tears. But with this one, I did both. Although, I'm more amazed that I laughed, because it's such a rarity for me, even when a book is described as comical. The debut novel of Calcadoon writer and journalist Megan Albany, it follows Vivian Walker in the last months before she dies from an aggressive form of cancer. Refreshingly, it's not about Vivian's attempt to attain spiritual enlightenment before she leaves this mortal coil. Instead, it's about the life admin she still needs to complete, including cleaning the fridge, doing her taxes, and amending her will. I realize this doesn't sound very amusing, let's face it, there's nothing funny about doing your taxes. But Albany has managed to make death and drudgery comical through an appreciation of life's absurdities. On her exploration of New Age advice, Vivian says, I have had the odd occasion where I manage to feel grateful, but unfortunately they are often interrupted when I notice how Clint didn't bloody bring the washing in like I asked him to. It's also about Vivian's reflections on her imperfect husband, the aforementioned Clint, and the challenges and joys of motherhood. Vivian isn't perfect, and this is an honest account of someone who has difficult relationships with other family members and who can also be irritating at times. Even though she realizes she should be spending as much time as possible with her loved ones, Vivian would actually just prefer more time to herself. Anyone who has walked with another through palliative care will also appreciate the sensitivity with which Albany portrays this vulnerable period, even as she still manages to do it with humor. It's a light, fun read that gets to the meaning of life through death. SL. Olga Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez. Hachette. US streamer, Hulu bought the rights for a TV adaptation of Olga Dies Dreaming last year. Olga is a wedding planner for Manhattan's rich and obnoxious, and she's good at her job. She's masterful in placating anxious mothers of the bride, and shows the utmost taste